We begin the series of self-paced videos for Module 2, Overcoming Fears and Limiting Beliefs with Fears and Needs. For this new module, we propose as guiding metaphor the idea of surfing the waves. In this context, just as a surfer faces the daunting power of the ocean waves, fear can be overwhelming when we confront uncertainty and the unknown. Fear can make us hesitant to take that first step into the vast sea of possibilities. In a similar way, needs in the context of the surfing metaphor refer to the essential requirements that individuals must have fulfilled to enable them to ride life's waves with confidence, adaptability, and optimal performance. As surfers rely on their gear to tackle the waves, meeting our basic needs empowers us to face life's journey with strength, resilience, and self-confidence. What do you say? Should we dive into the ocean this time? What we're going to cover in this first video is fear and need as the triggers for your responses and actions that significantly influence your entrepreneur journey and decision-making process. We'll start with what is fear and where it comes from, moving forward towards connecting limiting beliefs and fears, paying attention to what to be aware of when it comes to fears and limiting beliefs, closing with how to identify your needs behind a specific fear. Then we will be shifting towards the same action-oriented approach you got familiar with, focusing on learning how to shake your unhealthy beliefs. We will use Katie Byron's technique called the work for this. Let's check out the water, shall we? We cannot speak about fear if we don't also speak about courage. One may think that fear is something we should get rid of, while courage is something we should get more of. It's not always like that. Both of them play their own part in the choices we make every day about how we live our lives. Both are equally important and both can have a positive or a negative outlook on our actions, thoughts, and feelings. It's like we're on a bridge, and on one side there is fear, while on the other side there is courage. We can choose to move from one side to the other depending on the occasion, choosing what's best for us in that context. And no, it's not always best to choose courage instead of fear. There are times when fear is keeping us safe. There are times when courage is what puts us in harm's way. But today we will speak about fear from the perspective of keeping people anchored to what is familiar, limiting them in their growth and potential. About fear representing hesitation, doubt, and avoidance. About fear symbolizing the comfort zone and the reluctance for the unknown, often preventing people from venturing into new territories or pursuing their dreams. So, what is fear? Can it keep us from entering the waters and experience surfing? Fear is a natural and instinctual emotion that arises in response to perceived threats, danger, or uncertainty. It is a basic survival mechanism that protects us from potential harm and enables us to respond to potentially dangerous situations. Fear is an essential part of the human experience and has both psychological and physiological effects deeply rooted in our evolutionary history. Psychologically, fear can elicit a wide range of emotions, from mild unease to intense anxiety and even terror, but can also help build resilience and confidence. Fear often manifests in response to situations or circumstances that challenge our comfort zones, question our beliefs, or introduce uncertainty into our lives. Physiologically, fear triggers a series of changes in the body. When the brain perceives a threat, the amygdala, a part of the brain's limbic system, activates the body's stress response, triggering a release of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, which increase heart rate, blood pressure, and alertness to prepare us to take action. When confronted with a threat, our bodies activate the fight, flight, freeze response, which prepares us to either confront the threat or flee from it, but sometimes it also blocks us from having any kind of reaction, our body going into freeze mode. Fear can manifest in various ways, such as specific phobias, intense and irrational fears of particular objects, situations, or activities, such as heights, spiders, flying, or public speaking. General or social anxiety, persistent and excessive worry or fear about everyday situations or discomfort in social situations. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of rejection, anxiety related to potential failure in meeting expectations, to unfamiliar situations, to being rejected and excluded socially or professionally. All of these are facets for the concept of fear. We spoke during Module 1 in the second video about core beliefs, and we helped you identify which ones are unhealthy or limiting by using the 5 fingers technique. You may wonder why our Module 2 is called Overcoming Fears and Limiting Beliefs. The answer is quite simple. These two concepts are intricately and intimately connected in multiple ways. For example, your beliefs are based on personal experience, upbringing, or society's norms, and are deeply ingrained in your identity, be them limiting or not. If you were to think about challenging or contradicting them, it would be an understatement to say you would feel uncomfortable and sometimes even fearful, especially about those which refer to your own abilities or worthiness. Also, when it comes to limiting beliefs, one may suffer from confirmation bias. We mentioned it in Module 1 as well, but maybe it's time to explain it a bit more. It's when you seek evidence that reinforces your negative belief about yourself. This bias can intensify fear and lead to the inability to see your own potential. Limiting beliefs can also trigger negative self-talk, creating an inner dialogue filled with fear and self-criticism. This negative self-talk further reinforces the fears and inhibits people from taking positive actions. Limiting beliefs often include fear of failure or fear of rejection or not being accepted. People may fear trying something new or outside of their comfort area because they believe they will fail or feel embarrassed or disappointed. The connection between limiting beliefs and fears can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. When people believe they are incapable or unworthy, they may unconsciously act in ways that lead to outcomes aligned with those beliefs. When considering what to be aware of in regard to fears and limiting beliefs, the following ideas are worth a thought. Breaking the cycle of limiting beliefs and fears starts from challenging and reframing the negative beliefs, acknowledging the fears and taking positive actions. Recognizing that fears are often rooted in limiting beliefs allows you to address the underlying thought patterns and work on building self-confidence and resilience. You shouldn't step away from feeling fearful, but you should be encouraged and brave enough to act from within that place of fear, because experiencing fear is a natural human response, and it's okay to feel afraid at times. However, it is important to take action despite feeling fearful. That is the definition of courage as seen by Brené Brown, world-known researcher on topics of shame, fear, vulnerability, and courage. The first step in addressing fear and limiting beliefs is self-awareness. Be conscious of your emotions and thought patterns. But awareness alone is not enough. Taking action is crucial. Challenge yourself to step outside your comfort zone and face your fears with one small step at a time. Fear and limiting beliefs can create a negative mindset that hinders personal growth and success. Understand that your mindset influences how you perceive and respond to challenges. By cultivating a growth mindset and challenging negative thoughts, you can replace limiting beliefs with empowering ones. Practice identifying and verbalizing fears and limiting beliefs as a means of gaining or regaining control over them. We call it name it to tame it. When you acknowledge and articulate your fears or limiting beliefs, you bring them into conscious awareness, which is a solid step towards effectively managing them. We introduce a new concept to the table, our needs. Why are they important? Because they can be the driving forces of our limiting beliefs and fears, just like waves are the driving forces of surfers. Unmet needs can lead to fears and anxieties. When certain fundamental needs, such as safety, belonging, or self-esteem, are not fulfilled, it can create a sense of insecurity and vulnerability. For example, if someone lacks a sense of belonging in their social circles, they may develop a fear of rejection or isolation. So let's find out together, how can we ride the waves of needs? It is said that behind any decision, action, or inaction that we take, there is a reason. Most of the times, these are emotional reasons. But what if those reasons are not visible, not even to yourself? What if they are coming from a place of fear or limiting beliefs that you only recently started to be self-aware about? How can you further proceed on the path to break and shake these holdbacks? How can you identify your needs as driving forces for the fear and the negative self-talk so you can then address them and move towards meeting them? Step 1. Question your fears. Examine your fears and ask yourself, what are you trying to protect or avoid? For example, if you fear public speaking, what need might be at play? It could be a need for acceptance, avoiding embarrassment, or a desire to be seen as competent. Step 2. Explore your beliefs. Pay attention to the negative self-talk or inner dialogue that accompanies your limiting beliefs. Ask yourself where they originated from and how they connect to unmet needs. For instance, a belief that you're not good enough might be related to a need for self-esteem and validation. Step 3. Examine your thought patterns. Look for patterns in your fears and limiting beliefs across different situations. Identify recurring themes to obtain insight into the core needs that are influencing your thoughts and emotions. Step 4. Seek feedback. Trusted friends, family members, or mentors can provide valuable feedback on your behaviors and thought patterns that you might not have fully recognized. Step 5. Challenge your assumptions. Question the validity of your fears and limiting beliefs. Are there any concrete evidence supporting them, or are they based on assumptions and perceptions? If these 5 steps don't work, you can also consider seeking professional support. Reach out to a coach or a therapist based on the type of topic you are faced with. They can help guide you through the process of discovery or offer insights into your underlying needs. We don't leave you at the mercy of the ocean, drifting away in fear, in vulnerability, and in despair. We actually intend to give you a very powerful tool that you can use to shake yourself up when needed. This is why we propose to you Action 1: How to Shake Your Unhealthy Beliefs using the technique called The Work by Katie Byron. Grab that pen and paper and write down these 5 questions. Then take it as food for thought and answer each one thoroughly in your working journal. How to shake your unhealthy beliefs. Start by identifying an unhealthy belief related to your fears about being or acting as an entrepreneur. Write your limiting belief on a piece of paper. Something like, I'm not experienced enough to start a successful business. Step 1. Ask yourself, is this belief 100% true? And I emphasize on the 100%, not 99%, not 90%, not 50%, 100%, fully, undisputedly. You will see that the answer to this is usually no. Step 2. Ask yourself, which proof do I have that this is 100% true? If you answered with yes on the previous one. If you answered with no, ask, what proof do I have that it is not 100% true? Step 3. Continue and ask yourself, what do I feel and how do I act when this thought comes to the surface? Focus intensively on how do you feel. If you are unfamiliar with naming your feelings or looking at the layers underneath an emotion, refer to the Wheel of Emotions from your working journal. Step 4. Ask, who am I without this belief? Phrase it something like, I'm the one who doesn't fear anything, feels capable, feels satisfied and content, is happy and at peace, or whatever you feel like writing here. Spend some time on this one too. It is key to shaking the unhealthy belief. Step 5. Ask, how would I rephrase this so it becomes supportive? Like in our example, maybe I would go with, I'm experienced enough to start a business now, which we will later see if it's going to be successful or not. Either way will be fine. So what do you say? Do you want to try this tool on your biggest setback in your entrepreneurial efforts? Oh, and if you didn't get a chance to identify your saboteurs with the PQA assessment, now is an excellent time for that. You will see at the residential weekend how they fit in perfectly in this sea of torrents and torments. We end this video by saying, courage is not having the strength to go on. It's going on when you don't have the strength. Theodore Roosevelt's quote is inspiring because it redefines courage as the ability to persevere and continue moving forward, even in moments of weakness and adversity. It emphasizes that true courage is not solely dependent on strength, but rather on the determination to press on when faced with challenges, like when we are in deep waters, deeper than we would like to be. See you in our next video about strategies to build resilience.